of the sky a week or two ago, and I'm very excited about it. And the bad news is that it's not particularly well organized. I'm not going to be able to give you one of my typical lectures where everything is nice and neat and the jokes come at the right moments and so forth. This is going to be sort of more random hot air on a truly weird topic. And you will, all through this lecture, I warn you, you'll be continually asking yourself, what does this have to do with computer games? Well, we'll get there too. So what I want to talk about is something called subjunctivity. That is, you might think of subjunctivity as ifness. It is the concept of thinking about anticipated realities, things that might be but don't actually exist. What if, that kind of thing. Now, subjunctivity is enormously important. I did not realize how important it was until just a little while ago. And the best way to explain all of this is to start at the beginning. In this case, the beginning is about, a billion years ago, when we've got all the little invertebrates just beginning to form, and, well, no, about 500 million years ago, Cambrian era. And we've got the simplest little animals there, and they start having nervous systems. Now, those nervous systems existed initially solely to coordinate muscle action. That is, if you got 4 legs, you can't kind of randomly wiggle them around. You got to make sure they go in an organized way so you get somewhere. And that's what nervous systems initially did. But then came this real improved version that had one little photoreceptor on top of the animal. These were all water creatures, if this animal crawls along the bottom. And that photoreceptor, if it suddenly got dark, it said, move the muscles a lot! Because that obviously means there's something directly overhead, and anything over you is probably a predator. And so that was the beginning of brains. And from there, it was just a matter of, increasing the packing density, lower channel size, that kind of thing. Add more neurons, get smarter retinas, start putting in some processing. But something emerged as part of this, and that was actually the fundamental architecture of all nervous systems arose about this time. Pattern recognition. That is, it's one thing to simply say, well, if it gets dark, you better get out of there. But it's a lot better to be able to say, yeah, it got dark because a cloud came over the sun. Or it got dark because there's a great big mouth heading towards me. In other words, the ability to recognize patterns was the next thing that nervous systems developed. And they really refined. We got retinas and compound eyes and all those things developing. And this took us up through the amphibians. With amphibians, we had pretty complicated retinas and pretty good pattern recognition. They could really sense, that's something I eat, that's something I run away from, that's something I mate with. They were able to distinguish the things in the world. Reptiles added a new component to this, which was memory, really, very simple memory. You see, the earlier pattern recognition stuff said patterns in the environment will affect certain behaviors. But the reptiles basically, how many of you can program? Okay. Basically, the reptiles substituted variables for constants. The reptiles said, hey, rather than just memorize a pattern and have it in the genes, big mouth, big teeth, that means something coming to eat me. Rather than memorize that, why not learn it? We'll be born with the basics in the genes, but let's have an ability to remember things. So dinosaur's sitting here, munching on a branch, pulls the branch. Here's the wood crack, and the next moment, the branch hits him on the head, and he goes, ouch. He needs to remember, don't pull the branch. It'll fall on your head. So that pattern of events, branch breaking followed by pain, then needs to be somehow remembered, but you don't have enough neurons. You're a reptile. You don't have enough neurons to memorize every little detail. So they came up with a way of digesting all the patterns and simplifying them. And that was emotion. Really fear, lust, hunger, you know, all of the really primitive emotions are all based on sort of a simplified pattern recognition system. That is, you take this and say, oh wow, look at this leaf. Chomp, 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 chomp. Ah, it tastes terrible. And so you develop, that just goes into the disgust emotion. So we pretty soon recognize this as disgusting, and this as tasty. So very simple way of doing memory, and it worked beautifully. In fact, it worked so well, there was no need to change it. Reptiles stuck with it for 60 some odd million years. Next, though, came the birds. Actually, birds and mammals developed about the same time. And they both brought a fundamentally new element to the development of nervous systems, and that was sequentiality. That's the notion of actually registering sequences of things. How many of you ever built a TTL circuit? Good, good. For those of you who haven't, I'll try to explain some of the rudiments. TTL is a digital circuit with just logic gates and flip-flops and so forth. And you end up designing all... Computers are really just huge collections of digital logic. This is sort of all the little basic building blocks that go into a computer. When I was doing this back in the 70s, playing around with these things, I built a lot of circuits for a variety of reasons. And I quickly learned that pattern recognition was really easy to do. Well, all you do is just slap together a bunch of gates in whatever the right pattern is that you want to recognize, and then have them all collect together to one output that says yes or no. So pattern recognition was pretty easy. But then one day I tried sequential stuff. I had a sequence of pulses coming down a wire, and I had to be able to say, you know, if it's a 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, then we disarm the warhead. But if it's a 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, then we detonate it, or whatever. So doing all of that stuff, though, was immensely more complicated, because there are a whole bunch of new things you have to bring into the system. You've got to have a clock, you've got to have timing, so you've got to have your circuit sort of pulsing along, click, 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 here's a pulse, put it there, here's a pulse, put it there. And then you've got to have places to put them, to store them. You've got to have memory for all of this. So basically what you do is these pulses come in one at a time. At the right times, you've got to grab them, put them in the right memory location, and build it all up. And then you've got to know when to stop. You've got to say, okay, we got enough. Now let's look at the pattern we got. And then you hand it off to a TTL collection of gates that can do standard pattern recognition. But boy, the hard part was just transforming the sequence into a pattern. That's murder. And nervous systems have the same problem. It's really hard for a nervous system to detect and process sequences. And, but that's what birds and mammals brought into the picture. And if you look at it behaviorally, that's one of the big distinctions between birds and mammals on the one hand and reptiles, amphibians, fish on the other. That is, these guys have sequential stuff in their behavior. Bird song, migratory stuff. In order to migrate, a bird has to remember the steps of the path. Well, with mammals, it's obvious. But you know, reptiles, amphibians, they don't do any of that sequential stuff. They're just straight stimulus response type critters. So sequentiality was very important because it gave all sorts of wonderful new capabilities. And in fact, it turned out to be sort of a Darwinian bolero, because one subset of one group of the mammals, the primates, started really developing that stuff and saying, wow, this works, boy, I can do all sorts of neat things. And then another group, the hominids within the primates, said, let's go gung-ho with it. We're putting every bit of Darwinian capital we can into this investment. And so they started growing really big brains. And the brains, it worked fabulously. They were capable of doing all sorts of immensely complicated sequential operations, which made them very, very adapted to any environment they could encounter. And so they went around killing everything else off. In fact, the speed at which it is astounding how fast the human brain mushroomed in just 3 million years. It, quadrupled in size? The best evidence, if you really want to see physical proof of how fast the brain emerged, just watch a woman giving birth to a baby sometime. That head just doesn't want to fit out there. The pelvis is too small, and it's, push. That's hard. And that the female pelvis has changed shape dramatically to try to make a little more room in there. And that's why women walk so funny, because their pelvises are all screwed up. Anyway, by the way, that's why women wear high-heeled shoes too. High-heeled shoes make them do it even more. So anyway, all that really means is, see, I've got a pelvis that can hold a really big brain. So that's the evolutionary significance of high heels. Anyway, let's see, where was it? Sequentiality. So these big brains we had, the sequentiality is all handled by the cortex. So you got this cortex here that can handle all this sequentiality, and 2 things emerged from that. One side of the brain, language; the other side of the brain, music. Both sequential things. Now the musical side is nowhere near as well developed as the language side, but by God, we really took off with language. We used language for a zillion things, and boy, it really helped us out. But you know, evolution was too slow for us. And our ability to process sequential information by means of language is still highly limited. There is a natural length to the amount of information you can process in your brain at one time. It's a chunk, and it's called a sentence. And that's about the most you can really handle. And have you ever been irritated with people who do run-on sentences that just go on and on and on, and they just, you know, the verbs are all over the place, and it just keeps marching along, and it never ends, and you can't keep track of it? Well, that's because your brain just can't handle those real big, long sentences. So we can only really handle that much information. And really, a sentence isn't that much stuff, so it's kind of embarrassing. The big trick we came along with was artificial cortex. Let me show you something. Excuse me. Right here. Artificial cortex. See, by writing stuff down, all of a sudden, you introduce the concept of accountability. See, a lot of people think, you know, what made writing important? People say, well, communication. Now people can talk to each other. Well, they were always able to talk to each other. Oh, well, yeah, but they could talk to each other across a distance. Well, yeah, but they could get in a ship and go that distance, too. I mean, the communication aspects of writing were terribly important, but another aspect that is often overlooked is the way that writing changed the way we think. And I think that was the most fundamental effect of writing, because when you write things down, you can write down a whole bunch of sentences, a lot of them, in a long, long sequence, and then somebody can go back and check every one of them and say, no, wait a minute, let me look at this. See, have you ever noticed you don't trust the spoken word? You know, you go in, how many times have you dealt with somebody who says, oh yeah, friend, here, I'll help you out, this will be real great, just buy my used car here, it's a wonderful car, and so forth and so on. And you know, all of your little skepticism neurons start firing. And you say, wait a minute, there's something here. He just proved that this car is worth $10,000 and he's only asking $500 for it. There's got to be something wrong. But he proved it. I just don't trust it. Well, the thing is, if you went back and said, you know, put that in writing for me, what's he going to say? Well, I'm sorry, I can't do that. The reason why is, if you put it in writing, you could take that piece of paper and you'll start at the beginning and go through it. And, that's where he did it. There was the switcheroo that I didn't notice while he was talking. In other words, the writing allowed us to analyze bigger thoughts. It allowed us to process bigger ideas. And that in turn led to, in fact, the Greeks were the first ones to really play with this idea. Guess why the Greeks were the founders of Western civilization and all of that stuff? Because they happened upon this brain amplification device, writing. And boy, they were full of themselves about it too. Have you ever read any of the Platonic dialogues? The basic Platonic dialogue is Socrates and his straight man, and the straight man comes up and says, "Socrates, I was wondering, what is the nature of evil anyway?" And then Socrates says, "Well, I don't know, but you know, if you got an apple here, and then there's an egg there, then blah, blah, blah." And the guy says, "Oh, yeah, that's right." And then Socrates says, "Well, if that's true, then the egg has to be like this, and the apple goes over here like that." "Oh, yeah, that's right." On and on and on and on and on and on and on. And finally, at the very end, the straight man is saying, "Gosh, Socrates, I never would have thought of that." And the reasoning here is that they were able to go down this long, long primrose path, but because it's on paper, you can check it out and really believe it. And so you can go back, you know, Socrates always comes up with a surprising conclusion at the end. And that's why they killed him. He was supposed to be, you know, make the worse appear the better and all of that. But what was really important was you could start at the beginning of that dialogue and track him through line by line and check every line and say, you know, I went through the whole thing, and it is solid all the way through. There are no tricks in here. So this surprising result must be correct. So that then launched Western thought and linear thinking and mathematics and science and engineering, and it was only a hop, skip, and a jump from Plato to hydrogen bombs. So hooray for us, isn't writing wonderful? Now, you're probably wondering, what does any of this have to do with computer games? Well, now I'm going to get a little step closer to answering that question, and the answer is the computer does for our civilization, for our minds, the same thing that writing did for the Greeks, because it introduces a completely new style of thinking, subjunctivity, which is something that our brains don't handle very well. We can all say, well, you know, if a bird crashed into the windows, the glass would probably break. We can do that kind of reasoning, but how deep can you go into that? You know, what if I were to say, well, what if a truck were driving along here and a bird crashed into the thing just as an earthquake occurred and the cloud passed over the sun and there was some rain going on like this, and you'd get pretty confused real quick. Our brains just aren't really good at handling subjunctive thinking. We can only go about one level deep. Well, we've tried to cope with that. And the methodology that we developed for it is something called play. Play is an exercise in subjunctivity. That is, in play, now I'm talking about natural play, you know, the kid. Basically, the primary form of play is this, jumping up and down. In fact, linguistically, if you examine all the roots of all the words, jumping up and down is one of the fundamental root words behind the word play. And that's what kids do. And why is that play? Well, because they're testing their basic musculature. Oh, look, I can go up in the air, and I don't fall down either. And then they start extending that, and running, and jumping. And basically, they're just trying out all sorts of variations of musculature. And so, and of course, they fall down, clunk. Thank God they don't have as far to fall. But they all of this stuff, and occasionally they hurt themselves. But that's part of the subjunctive thing. Now, good play, though, is safe. See, the really good play, that's the art of modern playground equipment design, is a matter of coming up with these doodads that kids can do all sorts of crazy things on, and it's all foam rubber or whatever. If they hit it, it doesn't hurt them, and so forth. So what you're trying to do with children's playground equipment is to allow lots of subjunctivity. You want them to try out all sorts of crazy things, climb up it upside down and so forth, and really try out your musculature, and thereby learn how your body works, so you don't fall down when you're an adult. Now I can bring some of this home to you guys. I'll start off with a direct application. Play is the verb for game. That is, play is what people do when they have a game. Thus, you could say, I'm selling a game, a thing, or you are providing a service to your customers. Play. You can look at it either way. They both work. And we always think of it in terms of the object. But the service is just as valid a way of thinking about it as the object. And so you want to ask questions about, what is the utility of the play that I am offering my customers? I mean, how good is it? And here we come to a very interesting aspect. The whole point, one of the main points I'm driving at in this whole lecture is that subjunctivity is a central aspect of play. There are a couple of features, and they're sort of tied together. There's subjunctivity, the idea of I can try out this, I can try out that, and so forth. Another way of expressing that is you want to have lots of options. The more options you have, the more subjunctivity you have. And then the second fundamental principle is safety. Inside this game, we can't get hurt. Now, it's interesting. Subjunctivity is one of the primary aspects of all uses of the computer. Best example of this being a spreadsheet. Here's the middle manager working over the department budget, looking at the spreadsheet saying, oh, geez, I don't have enough money for this. And wait a minute. What if I get rid of, that's it. What if I dump the daily massages for employees? What'll happen then? Not enough. He's playing what-if games with the spreadsheet, and the computer is doing all the dirty work for him. So, same thing with a word processor. With a word processor, the way you actually use it, you sit down, you type in your letter, you stupid fucking asshole, I can't, and then you look at it and say, that's probably a little too strong. And you go back and then eventually it comes out, dear boss. Anyway, but the idea is you look at the language there, you read it, and you say, what if I were to send this to my boss? And you think, I'd be out of a job. So let's try something else here. It gets across the same idea, but isn't quite so infuriating.
It doesn't happen using it.
Yes, don't ever do that. So anyway, you're trying out all these combinations, or sometimes you're just saying, how does this look on the page? Oh, gee, it runs off just one line over the end of the page. I'll just cut out one of these words here and shorten this sentence, or maybe I'll make the margin a little wider. You're playing what-if games with the document then. And indeed, if you think about it, a really good word processor is one that lets you do lots and lots of what-ifs. That's highly subjunctive, that allows you to say, well, what if I did it in a different font? Or what if I put footnotes in here, or a table there, or what if I indexed it? How would that work? I mean, would it look good? Would it be useful? So a word processor is highly subjunctive. A spreadsheet is immensely subjunctive. Now we look at computer games, and one of the first things that I notice is that computer games are only partly subjunctive. That is, one flaw in game design immediately leaps forward, and that's undoability. Every application in the world gives you some amount of undoability. There are two standard levels, the single step backwards and the revert to saved. Those are the two standard forms of undoability. And by the way, I believe we could do much better. I think we could have total undoability in all word processors, spreadsheets, everything. It really isn't difficult to achieve. Technically, it's not difficult to achieve total undoability. So you could just, at the end, here you are in the thing, and you say, I made a mistake somewhere. Computer, take me back to the beginning of this work session, and then play it forward for me in fast. Give me the fast forward, or the instant replay. There's where I made my mistake. Okay, stop right there. I'll fix it from there. I really think that's the way applications should be. In fact, some of them are slowly approaching that. Games, though, it's the opposite. Game designers have this sick notion that if you make a mistake, you must die. You know, I'm sorry. You walked around the corner and there were 5 million monsters. Oh no! And you're shot dead. Well, you can't say, undo that. I'd like to walk backwards if you don't mind. The game designer says, no, you're dead. Too bad. Well, that's not effective use of the computer. You are working against the grain of the machine. And in fact, players have been getting around that for years and years and years by the simple thing of, here I am at the corner. I wonder what's around the corner. I better save the game. You save the game, you walk around the corner, blowy! Reload the game. Now, some game designers, aware of this, actually fight it by saying, we're not going to allow you to reload the game from inside the game. You got to quit the game, go back out to the operating system, relaunch the game, and load it from there. Because we want to make this as tedious and difficult as we can for you so that you won't do it. Now, why are we doing this to our customers?
Good reviews from magazines.
What is the point of making, this is like a word processor that deliberately disables one of the keys unless you hit it really hard. You know, why are we imposing tedium on our users? Yeah.
Because otherwise the impression is that the game would be too easy.
Yes.
You just keep saving until you finally get through the bad area.
Yes, that's the problem that game designers tell themselves about. Oh, geez, if I let them undo it, they'll zip right through to the solution immediately. Maybe that says something about your design.
Yeah.
Children don't get to undo when they hit the ground. They get consequences. They can feel that.
Well, playground is a form of undo because it's a safe place. If they did it on rocks and stuff,
but
they wouldn't have undo.
But there's a measure of consequences they can feel. But you have to give the player some feeling of feedback of their planning and action.
Well, you could easily do a count. That is, you could say, here's how many times you undid. Just for your own information.
A score.
Yeah, you could call it a score if
Your
you
lateness.
Yeah, but we don't take that argument and extend it to its logical extreme by saying we're going to carpet playgrounds with spikes. That way they'll really learn, won't they?
You see this.
We actually do that if the play has no consequence. Like, for example, if you go to a training camp in the Marines, right?
Yeah.
They shoot live ammunition over your head, and you have to belly crawl under that.
Whoever called the Marines fun and games?
Actually, you can never be hit by those bullets, even if you stand up.
Yeah, well, yes, that's true.
Emotionally, you don't believe
But
it.
they are shooting live rounds over your head, and they're training you and you're playing, in a sense.
Yeah.
Well, there's a thing called risk compensation also.
That's not-
where if you basically give people a perception that risk has been reduced, they will do more. And a good example of that is Volvo drivers.
Yes.
And-
Craziest people
And in
in the
fact,
world.
in England, they had a study where when seatbelts went in as this mandatory, the amount of pedestrians hit by cars went up.
Yeah.
Because people were driving more recklessly.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's a misplaced effort at creating a sense of jeopardy, which is perceived in a primitive way as a form of dramatic excitement, which in turn lends to engaging or creating suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
But I think it's misguided.
There's been some very good adventure games that have done very well that you could not screw up.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also Monkey Island, Return to Zork, a couple others, where you couldn't get killed unless you really did something incredibly deliberate.
Turns out to find the right amount of foam.
Yeah. We need to provide foam rubber all over the place, but in many ways it's sort of like playground design. You know, I'm sorry, if the kid is up here and he jumps off, he's going to break a leg. But we can at least put a lot of foam rubber and bark on the ground and pad things and no sharp edges. We can at least do a lot of that stuff. We don't need to make it easy to hurt yourself.
Since we are analogizing to children and their developmental process, would you also feel that children are born intrinsically interactive and then are socialized more and more into
Absolutely.
linearity?
In
which
fact,
yeah.
I have
Oh,
a
yeah.
wonderful line on
That's
this.
great.
By the way, I'm writing a book on interactivity design now, and I just
I know.
finished the first draft. And I'm patting myself on the back profusely over a particular line I came up with.
Would you care to share it?
Yes, I'm trying to recall it.
Well, in the meantime, what I wanted to say is that as a parent, and I've watched the linearization of consciousness in a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, and the 12-year-old is in middle school, so now first period is language arts, second period is mathematics, third period is science, whereas what I'm hoping is that he and his sister will, through the digital environment that you are, I hope and think, advocating, and that I am advocating, will be able to have, of course, there'll be their linear side, but then there'll be this alinear part of their consciousness too, if we do it right. And so they'll have bigger consciousnesses than we who grew up in the linear world.
Basically, the drive to interactivity is one of the fundamental, it is instinctual in humans. That is, this playing is not something kids do to waste time. They're
Playing is
born
learning.
with it in their brains. You play with things to learn about them. And it's not just hominids that are this way. Most mammals, all the carnivorous mammals, have instinctual play behaviors. Kittens, puppies, that's play they're doing, and they're doing it in order to learn. Now, so that's so the curiosity to play is one, and in fact, this is actually a drive to learn. So you might say there's a deep instinctual drive to learn on the part of children. And I think the line in my book was, it is testimony to the towering failure of our educational institutions that they have been more successful in suppressing the instinct to learn than all of our laws and vice squads have been in suppressing the instinct to engage in improper sex. Therefore, perhaps we should recruit teachers for vice squads. Anyway, that's where I have a mean joke, but way back.
Isn't there a part of the price justification? The argument you always hear is, well, we pay $7 to go see a movie. Oh, well, that's only 2 hours of entertainment. You pay $50 for our game, you have 50 hours of entertainment. Look at the value, you know. And so it kind of creating that model, there's a certain kind of justification for, well, we're charging this much. Look how much you can get out of it. Whereas if you're able to zip through it, all of a sudden that kind of goes away a little bit. Oh, we only spent 2 hours. Oh, well, maybe you should only pay this much.
That argument, actually, I think I was the first person to present that argument about 12 years
You
ago.
talked about CD-ROM first time.
Yes, and the flaw in the reasoning there, well, it's not so much a flaw as the mechanism used to achieve that. That is, how do you get 50 hours of gameplay? Do you achieve it by having 10 hours of gameplay plus 40 hours of frustrating head-butting of butting your head against the wall? Or are you actually delivering 50 hours of gameplay? So in many cases, many of these long games that give you hundreds of hours of gameplay are really just forcing you to go through all sorts of tedious crap. The worst are all of the various graphic adventures where you go over here to get this thing so that you can go back and go over here, under here, over here, up here, out here, so you can use this to get that, so you can go over here and over here and over there and so forth.
It's easier. I think it's easier to make it more tedious.
But
Yes,
Tetris,
tedium
you
is
know,
easy to design.
Right.
Any idiot can design tedium,
Right.
and many of them do.
But Tetris and Shanghai have over 50 hours of gameplay. Tetris and Shanghai have over 50 hours of gameplay.
Yeah,
And
but
those have no tedium in them.
But the justification for that, what we're calling tedium hours, I think what I always hear is, well, but we have to make it hard enough for the hardcore gamers.
But
It's
that's
absolutely true.
Which is
I was
by
on the-
another way of saying that the mass audience will never buy it.
Right, and that's absolutely true. We had an adventure game that tanked. It tanked in the reviews because it didn't have enough gameplay, quote unquote, couldn't play, it was too easy. We built the next game, we had puzzles in there that were unsolvable, strictly for the magazines,
Right.
and it was a big hit.
With the
But-
magazines and
but
stuff.
Well, that's it. Here's your, the
many
next
hint books?
great title
But the
is
audience is
Tedium.
But the audience has changed.
Well, I would hope so.
Me too.
Chris' example of word processors and spreadsheets, though, cost more than games, but you can undo them far more often
Good
than
point.
this. So I
Yeah.
don't think,
That's a good point.
I don't think there's tension.
That's because they're productivity tools, they don't want to frustrate you.
Yes.
That's not the
You're
point.
trying to get
One would
something.
Yeah, but why do games
one would
like
debate about Excel, but, other than that, it's true, they're designed and they're polished, and games should be similar.
Yeah, but
I mean,
why
we're
should
gonna-
game be frustrating?
Well, I can tell you, this is a long time ago, this is 1994, but 1993, 92 when this actually happened. We had the Chris Lombardi Memorial Puzzle in Return to Zork, because Chris Lombardi had panned Levergoss Bubbles 2, because it was too damn easy. The only person who liked the game besides me was Hal Barber of LucasArts. Everyone else thought it stunk because it was over in 3 hours. You don't pay $30 for a game that's over in 3 hours. So we put puzzles in there that were very ridiculous, solely to get the magazine reviewers to say, it took me 40 hours to finish this game. This has my stamp of approval, and that was what determined what getting shelf space in the sales was.
But maybe the concept of these
That's a
puzzles,
very cynical attitude, but it was the case at the time.
maybe
It's
these
changing.
puzzles themselves are the fundamental problem.
Oh,
You
yeah,
can't really play with them.
I've been
You
basically.
either do it or you don't.
Yeah.
You
I've been
can't
saying
play.
for the last 4 years, will someone please do an adventure game that looks like the Incredible Machine where the puzzles are real, but it's
Yes.
just
Yeah.
hard
Well,
to
a puzzle
explain.
is something that is Boolean. You get it or you don't,
Right.
and so how can you have time play? Basically, it's sort of like, a wall that either you go through or you don't, and so do we slow them down by making them butt their heads against it? Yes.
I think that the interesting thing about the comparison of like a word processor or Excel spreadsheet to a game is that productivity tools like that are not so much a game, they're a game environment. In other words, they're a blank slate in which you make up your own game. It's very much like the Incredible Machine, very much like there's a number of very classic games, and very
Yes.
few games that are like this don't become classic.
Yes.
And so then you get these things that are terribly linear, and you say, well, how can we make this thing more, have more what ifs in here? It's like, well, you just add more in, and that doesn't really make it more free. It
This,
doesn't
by
really
the
let you
way,
make up your own what ifs.
this underlines a movement that has been developing for quite some time, and I don't think we fully understand this concept yet, but it's the idea of sharing creative control with the user. And there have been some sensational successes here. MUDs are an excellent example of this. And there have been many people, this is not a new idea, this has been tried in various ways for many years. I don't think we understand the underlying principles, how you make the division, and how you say, this is the creativity that I'm going to give to the audience, and this is the creativity that I'm going to reserve for myself. But I know that the willingness to make that decision is a fundamentally important concept in game design. Yes?
I think that we, as a human race, will put ourselves through an awful lot of pain to have fun. And when I say that, what I mean is that we will go through a lot of problems and issues because the end result we perceive to be fun. And whether it be to go watch an NBA game and have to fight the crowds to go do it or something like that. It's because we're searching for enjoyment. That's the fundamental philosophy behind games, is whether or not it's fun to play. And everything that isn't fun, if we were to really look at it, a good game should be judged on whether or not it's fun to play.
Yeah.
Not whether or not we learn anything from it or whether or not we gain anything else. And I'm not saying that learning isn't fun. What I am saying is that sometimes we focus on how long it should be or what kind of value is in it or something like that. We should be focusing on whether or not it's fun.
Yeah, that fun element though, I hate the word fun because it's a mush-mouth term. Really, is there one person in this room who's willing to defend to the death any particular definition of fun? It's just, fun just is what is really your own personal taste, and we sort of hide behind that word. So we don't have any better word. It's the one we have to rely on, but we got a problem here. Yes?
How about terror and reward? that's kind of the point in Doom, is that if it's really easy to go through, if you can save it every few seconds, when you get to the end, so what? But, you know, when somebody comes out of the darkness and kills you, and you know you don't have a save, you know, your heart really beats hard.
Yeah.
I would say though that in Doom and Quake, I think they're both tremendously successful games. They share the creative process and their environments.
Yeah.
They're very successful games. You can keep playing all over the place, all different new things to go. It's an environment just like the word processor or spreadsheet. And I think people do learn. And one, your point is, I don't think there are fun games that don't involve player learning.
Bill?
I think one of the secrets of missed is that someone there must have sat down and said, you know, I really like adventure games because I like to explore and stuff, but I don't want to do any hard work or puzzles, and I don't really want to get killed. And so I'm just going to create a beautiful environment that's fun to sit around in, because no one ever finishes the game and buys it. My understanding is they either get the rule book to finish it, or they just basically move around and do whatever they want to do. But I think the percentage of people who don't finish it is some awful high 90% percentile thing. They just basically took something, cut out the part that they thought was tedium, and created a cute environment to hang around in.
I'm going to close off this phase of the open discussion section by making one more point that has nothing at all to do with games, but which I think is important and very distantly relates to games. And that is that although I argued that the real value of writing is the way that it extends our ability to think, and I'm arguing the same thing for for subjunctivity, I will also observe that writing is still very, very valuable as a communications medium, and I think the same thing will become true of subjunctivity. That is, I believe that the next level of human communication will be the subjunctive communication. Now, I'm sure you're saying, what the hell is that? And I'll give you a very good example. Here you are, middle manager at Megacorp Inc., with 50 nameless people working for you. You have no face, you know, you're typical manager here. And your boss comes to you and says, Jones! Everybody in your corporation is named Jones. Got to cut your budget by 10%. Now, the way we do that now with memos or email is basically a process of headbutting. Boss says, you will cut by 10%. And the manager says, impossible, can't be done. We'll have to shut down the whole department, everybody will die. And the manager says, you will cut by 10%. And you say, we're all going to die if we do that. I'm absolutely certain. And the boss says, well, 9%, but here's how I know you could let go your personal masseuse. So get rid of her and see how that does. And basically you do all this headbutting, back and forth, and it doesn't really accomplish anything. In the end, it's just a battle of wills. Well, imagine how this process would be simplified. And in fact, this is already starting to happen all over the country. Boss says to manager, cut your budget by 10%. Manager says, look, here's my budget spreadsheet. Show me. And now the boss has the spreadsheet, and he looks at it, and maybe the two of them are side by side, and you say, what about this expense here? And you say, well, go ahead and cut it, see what happens. That is subjunctive communication. It is far richer communication. Notice that in this particular example I'm giving, it's a far more constructive approach. They're not just butting heads, they're working on a problem together. An immensely superior form of communication. Same thing could be, of course, there's one flaw in this particular example, and that is that there's no workflow simulation. This is strictly a monetary simulation. That is to say, the boss gets to see the spreadsheet and where the money is spent, but he doesn't know what gets produced. So it would be very nice if we could have a related thing, a sort of a productivity spreadsheet that says, all right, the secretary does this, and the mail boy does that, and the engineer does this, and the production lead does that, and here's how all of their work fits together, and how this person supports that person, and quantified in such a way that you can say, you know, if we take away 10% of the male boy, you know, chop off his arm or something, then his output goes down by 10% and see how that flows through the whole organization. You'd need that as well. Such a device does not exist at the moment. However, it could be cobbled together out of some existing applications. I suspect that this concept, though, can be broadly extended to a great many things. For example, at the educational level, the most disturbing aspect of education for me is its anti-interactivityism. That is the fact that it is reduced to simply, I'm the smart guy, you're the dummies, sit on your butts while I spew knowledge all over you. And that never really works. It would be much better if I could, you know, just sort of hand you a little piece of software that's a simulation that makes one little point. See, we've always thought of simulations in terms of verisimilitude. A good simulation is accurate. No, that's not the way to do it. It's like writing. A good essay is not total truth, because the world of truth is huge. Nobody can ever capture that. So if you're writing a good paragraph or a good sentence or a good letter, anything you write, if you're trying to do a good job, the idea is to zero in on the one idea you want to communicate that one idea and nothing else. Well, that's the way we should be able to build simulation. That is simply, you know, be able to slap something together that says, look, you know, if you don't send $50,000 in unnumbered bills to this place, you know, then you'll see this body of your wife appearing. You know, that's a simulation. Whatever, we can have lots of communications like that.
But, you know,
Yes.
the educators, you can show them stuff like that, and they say, but it's play. You know, they hate the idea of play. It's got to be, school's got to be miserable.
Yeah, yeah. I would amend Shakespeare to say, first, we kill all the teachers. But, I say that having been one. Anyway,
We're suffering too.
Yes. So anyway, I would hope that a language of simulation, a language actually strong in subjunctivity, emerges for our use, so that it isn't so much a matter of you load the Microsoft Simulate, you know, that's 50 megabytes and crashes every 10 minutes, and you know, it allows you to has a manual that thick and allows you to create simulations of the U.S. economy and so forth. I'm thinking in terms more like a language where instead of saying, you know, if you do this, this is what's going to happen, instead it does that dynamically. And this raises problems because any such language has to piggyback on natural language, English in our case, and natural language really sucks when it comes to subjunctivity. The ability of our language to handle subjunctivity is very poor. There are a few languages, just a few, that do some very interesting things with subjunctivity, but they're really hard to understand for obvious reasons. I mean, a few natural languages. It may be that we need to, I'm coming to the conclusion that we need a kind of a standardized vocal language to talk to computers. I very much doubt that the pure natural language interface is ever going to really work. I suspect we need some kind of scaled down thing where we can say, computer, wait, and you know, we talk to it in baby talk, something like that. So.
I'll give you a prime example where that worked out. Everyone tried so hard to get handwriting recognition to work. And the device that finally succeeded,
yes,
a limited alphabet, with a limited stroke set, and once you master it, it understands everything you write.
Perfect. Yeah, that's the perfect example. I would like to see the same. I think for general purpose computing, we will see much the same thing develop with respect to the human voice, sort of a scaled down version of natural language that's small enough that a computer can understand it without spending 50 megabytes, and yet large enough that a human being can express interesting thoughts.
In terms of natural language or cultural subjunctivity, I remember in the mid-1980s when I worked for a Japanese company, there was a class being taught in Tokyo for Japanese businessmen who were going to work in the United States, the theme of which was how to survive in a primitive culture. And
And that's very relevant.
what my experience in the senior man, being the only American at my level or above in a Japanese company, was that the process of subjunctivity was orders of magnitude higher. And what happened was, as I became enculturated into that, I came to love the experience. It became this sense of liberation, or put another way, I remember once I was asked a certain question, the next morning I called up my partner and I said, I gave the wrong answer. She said, what, you mean the answer is no? No, the answer is still yes, but it was the wrong answer, because you see, it's like we're all one big mind. And when the boss asked, he's at the center of the big mind, and he was asking this part of the mind, me, to answer that part, but he meant this, and then it related to that. And I went, and I said, does that make any sense? And she said, I think you're beginning to catch on. So it's worth thinking about that there are places where it may be a little more advanced.
The Japanese language has an interesting subjunctive subset, kind of a formal language used in addressing one's superiors, wherein you, in effect, the closest translation would be to say that we are playing at this. A good example is, instead of saying, where an American would say, oh, I hear your father died, the Japanese would say, I have heard that your father has played at dying. And this introduces a subjunctivity, which the value of the subjunctivity is people can back away from it if they want. It gives everybody a lot more freedom of maneuver.
There are vast gradations in
Oh, yes.
presenting positions. And the other thing that's unusually interesting for me in Japanese business relative to the headbutting model that you described is that an idea, if I produce an idea, it's not anchored in authorship or attribution to me so much as it is an idea that goes into this big collective discussion, nor is your idea. And so the ideas sort of dance with each other as we do, but it's not polarized. It's not a Darwinian struggle. It's rather an effort to achieve what they call wa, or harmony, or balance in the discussion.
Yeah. Well, let's see. That pretty much concludes the main points that I wanted to make. There's a lot of other fascinating detours along the way, but I'd like to, we're just about out of time anyway, so let's just open it up to general discussion. And yes?
Okay, you mentioned about creativity and evolving players, but one of the things that's kept board wargaming going for decades is the fact that the players can change the game. In fact, that's a major part of it, is doing variants and doing your own version.
Yeah.
So.
The players of, especially war games, first there were scenarios, then there were scenarios with rules changes, and then the real ultimate in this was, I can never remember the name of this board game produced by the three guys in Massachusetts that allowed you, where your move was to change the rules. There was a set of rules, and as each person played, he in effect said, okay, I'm changing this rule now. It was an endlessly intricate game, wonderful game.
You don't mean Cosmic Encounters?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So, anyway, let's see. So, yeah, changing the rule, that gives the players a lot more creativity, and that's one reason why that game was so successful. Yes?
You mentioned a couple of Chris's graphics adventures. Did you ever get a chance to see two games, The Last Express and Blade Runner, from recently?
No.
That try and focus on a non-linear sort of adventure. They have a lot of events that are continuously run, and you basically walk around this environment. Things happen to you. In both cases, you're solving a mystery. And if you're at the right place at the right time, you can see, there's a bad guy going into the bank.
I think Supercom did that one of their murder mystery games. Place in one house, and events just transpired, and you walk around and solve the police force.
Yeah, well, that's also the basis of the play.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. So. Yes.
So, I heard you talk once on that rumor stuff you're doing. So, in a way, this rumor thing can create more foam or undoability because the characters can kind of do stuff. It doesn't have to be fixed dialogue once it's distilled out.
Deniable reality. I think that for the moment is beyond our abilities. I've played some with some of the ideas, and it's really fascinating stuff to go around and change the reality as you're going. And in fact, I know one guy was working on a game once that was based on an extension of, there's a famous joke riddle where the joker just takes a piece of paper and writes down a 20-digit binary number. And then turns to you and says, okay, 20 questions. You can ask 20 questions in sequence of whatever to try to figure out what I have here. And you ask a question and he consults it, and if there's a 1 there for that question, he says yes. And if there's a 0, he says no. And you go through the questions. He's just, he doesn't know what you're driving at. Eventually you converge on something on the 20th question and you say, it's a pot holder. And he says, okay. Now you could build a game out of that concept. Basically, instead of saying, I have my reality and you must maneuver around in your reality, in my reality, you say, you're going to create your own reality in front of you, and you'll think you're living in this little bubble universe that's all void. And as you move forward, as you say, oh, that looks like a monster. Okay, we're going to have a monster now. That concept is very exciting. I've never seen it done, but I've played around with that idea. There are there's some really bad traps in that. Like, what if you're dealing with a person with a really twisted imagination? How do you stay ahead of him? So there are some problems there. You control that with the language you give them. You just don't allow them to say those naughty words or whatever. Yes?
In terms of undoability, one simple, successful product was Barbie fashion design. It's
Yeah.
doability, undoability, doability, undoability.
Yeah, and all
Huge.
creativity is in the hands of the user.
Nail
So-
designer, jewelry designer, etc.
Yeah, there's been, I think, too much emphasis on the creativity, how much creativity does the designer have? And I really think that in this field, the emphasis of good design is how much creativity can the designer award or present or offer to the customer. Well, I think we're out of time, so thank you very much.
You know Ken, yes?
Yeah.
Who are you with?
Actually,
Thank you.
I just had my own company, but I got an offer in April from San Diego.
Okay, yeah, it's a fascinating idea. I don't have my hands around it yet. It's one of those things where there are little threads running in every direction, and I need to chase them all down. But there's some neat stuff in
I'm
there.
actually now designing front panels for
Well, thanks.
corporate stuff.
So you speaking games?
Yeah, I was actually building a 3D front end for Congress.
Oh, okay.
So, which actually never got released for a variety of reasons.
Did you give a lecture in Texas
The one
about
which is the comedy circle.
better
Didn't
programming?
do that.
They
Better
didn't
what?
handle the management of the web.
Programming language behind programming.
And I kept trying to tell them that they had
It would have been around March.
They didn't fund it.
I think so. I listened to part of it.
You know, full 3D environment with all the wealth of information of Congress would have made, I think, a lot
I
more
just
sense.
clicked in, it sounded like,
Yeah, I think
Yeah, sometimes.
I didn't, in that lecture, I don't think I gave specifics. I think I was talking about the concepts and the desiderata.
yes.
So, yeah, I remember that lecture now.
It made so much sense. Of course, often things that make so much sense.
I'll never get a job at Microsoft.
My question is, you talked about fun being hard to figure out exactly what it is, and it's such a mouth term, and yet you know, it's almost like an impossible task because we can define a lot of things in this life. Fun is one of the most important things we can get our hands around, but yet it's what a job is.
Yep.
You know, and so we say, well, fun is learning. Since I can define learning, then I can hit that target. But that's like looking for your contact lens in a better light, because not where you dropped it. You know, there's. I don't think that we should just give up on it.